Okay, we should be live.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to start today's meeting, if that's okay with everybody, with a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge with respect that we're in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, and that the land on which we're gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and known as Boading. Boading is the home of the Garden River First Nation, Machiwana First Nation, and the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council. Welcome, and thanks for joining us here today. I don't think that there's any opportunity here for anyone to declare any pecuniary interest. I don't think that's required, but if anybody has any, please feel free to mention that now. In terms of the agenda, my apologies. I've made a date error. So ultimately, it's asked here that we accept the agenda for April 30th. We could change that to May 1st. That would be great. That is the current date. Great. And so resolve that the agenda for the Cultural Vitality Committee Arts and Culture Assistance Program Subcommittee Review meeting for May 1st, 2025, with modification be approved. So there we are. Thank you, Lee and Donna. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So business arising. So I've actually, Virginia's here, but I've asked her to speak a little bit about the outside agencies funding process that may have some bearing on our conversation as we move forward. I've also made some notes to talk about previous meetings where we've met as subcommittee members in the past year to talk about the current ACAP guidelines and where we want to go, and just provide porting over some of those notes from those prior conversations. And if we want to take a look at the evaluation process review, some of these things, some of what we're talking about today will be relevant to the guideline redevelopment, and some of these pieces are more relevant to the documents that we have under our control under the Cultural Vitality Committee. So we won't have to go through council for the approval and changes to documents like the application. But other pieces, I believe, like the guidelines and the rubrics, I do believe need review at the council level or approval at that point. So I'll hand it over to Virginia, if that's okay, to talk about outside agencies and bring us kind of all up to speed.
Yeah, so at the last council meeting, when the budget was approved, council had passed the resolution that they approved. So I'll just read the resolution for information. So resolve the council increase the cultural assistance program funding by 160,000, with 90,000 of the increase allocated to operating as follows. So Bush Plain Museum and Art Gallery were each given an operating increase of $30,000 each, which then left the remaining funding for ACAP. Further, be it resolved that future annual increases requested by those three agencies be brought to and decided by the Cultural Vitality Committee. So moving forward, if those agencies are requesting an increase to what's already been budgeted, they're going to be coming forward to the CVC. So we're going to be working out some timing with regards to when those applications have to come in order for requests to be brought forward. Normally right now they have a separate process from ACAP. So we still see the two processes happening. ACAP is going to stay as that process, and the process that those three main agencies follow will be the same, that they have to submit the letter, they submit their metrics. There's a full agreement that's signed. Right now that closes at the end of August. We're going to have some discussions with finance if we have to have that happen a little bit sooner. So that's one piece of it. And then the committee, if they're asking for 30, the committee has an opportunity to review and may make a recommendation that it may be different than the 30 that's requesting based off of analysis. Again, that's still going to be, we're still fleshing out that process. With ACAP, do they then have the opportunity to apply for a one-time project funding? And then that would come through potentially to ACAP if needed. But again, making them well aware that the pot is very overprescribed. There's not a lot of money for all these organizations. So it probably, would be very challenging based off of the amount of applications that we currently get, since they're already receiving core funding. So just kind of that's out there for, kind of discussion, and then looking at, as Alicia said, really looking at those, the guidelines, and if we're looking at caps in other areas, because, some of the challenges we've been facing as we assess the applications. Lee.
Sorry, Lee, go ahead. I saw you nodding along there.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I just know from the guidelines, I know we're reviewing them shortly in the agenda, but as they read now, they wouldn't be able to qualify for any funding because of the exclusion criteria currently set.
Yes,
So I
Correct.
just wanted to acknowledge that currently.
for sure. Um, yeah, I think the biggest concern for us, again, like those smaller one-time projects, I think it would be the purview of the committee to determine whether or not we'll say the art gallery of Algoma, if they had a small project or a medium-sized project that they wanted to apply for, could send it through ACAP. That's not, outside of their base funding, right? Their core funding. It would be, again, up to the Cultural Vitality Committee to determine whether or not that's a request that they'd like to consider. But I think that's what we're kind of looking at right now. Donna?
Virginia, I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, can you repeat what you said at the very beginning, which was the cultural funding increase to X dollars from X dollars? And can you just say that again? I want to write it down, please.
Yeah, so the cultural funding, so we put in the request for 160,000, which they approved, but
Yeah.
90,000 of that money was allocated to Bush Plane Museum and Art Gallery, which left the remaining 70,000 for the other cultural pots. So there was a little bit of funding for heritage. The bulk of the funding went to increase our ACAP contributions that we could divide out.
And what was just for my own thought process here, what was ACAP before let's call it 60? Well, round it off or whatever the right number would be.
104.5.
Okay, and so the 104.5 went to 170, give or take?
It went to
170.
170?
Yes.
170.
Yeah, and
Okay.
4,500 to increased heritage. The budget for heritage before was 1,500.
Okay. And can you quickly, if I don't want to overtake things here, but can you quickly explain, like, why was that recommended, or why was that decision made to take, because when you requested the additional $160,000 of funding, was this parameter in terms of 90,000 of it going to the Bush Plane, et cetera, was that part of that, or
No.
and how did this come to be?
So the original request was to increase the cultural funding, which would have been ACAP and to heritage and public art, which were our main pots. So really focusing on ACAP and a little bit of money for heritage. That was the request that went to council. Through deliberations at the time on the floor, this is the resolution that came forward.
Okay, and do you get a sense of why that happened? Because essentially, while it's always great to get more money, essentially what you asked for a specific purpose was not honored in the way that, or was not approved in the way that you had requested it, and for what you intended it to be used for. So I'm not asking you to say anything that's, like not wasn't out there in the media that day in terms of the conversation that was had, but like, where did this idea come from? Was this from like a counselor who thought that can you help me understand?
I wish I had a little bit more background to be able to provide. I think in the past when we've asked for the larger requests, we've ended up getting a portion of it. I think what they saw this time is those organizations went in with some larger asks. And when they did the assessment of what we were asking for with the 160, it really is that we ended up getting 70 of what we had asked for. So in the past, we would ask for the larger amounts and we'd get a portion of it. So I think it's just kind of, they rolled it into one resolution where they divided the asks out and kind of lumped it together, as opposed to saying, we're going to give you 50% of your ask for this pot, right? So, I think again, down the road in a few years, or a couple of years, we'd be going back again, asking for potentially more funding for our ACAP pot, so that we're getting to the point that we want to hit that value of, being able to meet the growing demand for those grants, right? So I think every application intake that we have, it continues to build the case for the need in our community.
And was there something within these asks that the Bush Plain, et cetera, were looking for that precipitated this? So give them some of the money you guys have asked for, even though you didn't ask for money for them, number one, but then number two, now we're going to make sure that you're involved, if I understood what you said correctly, in the adjudication of their requests in the future going forward. So do you have any sense of like where anything came from there?
I think so. Each of the three organizations did submit requests for increases, which is a separated process right now from the
Mhm.
ACAP process, right? So the way that
Yep.
works is they make the submissions. I prepare a budget request based off their submissions, and then it goes straight to council for deliberation and consideration. So I think, they obviously, all the groups are, costs are increasing, the need is increasing. So that's where those submissions came from. I think ultimately council would like to have the cultural vitality has a really good lens of what's happening in the community. So I think getting additional feedback from them, I believe they saw that as important to say, when these requests are coming in, what are you seeing, right? Are they meeting the KPIs? Are they, doing their due diligence? Are they looking for other avenues of funding? So I think that's where they wanted the CBC to weigh in on the requests and help support those recommendations.
Okay. And one
Alicia,
last
do you-
question. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say if Alicia had anything to add as well, but
No,
hopefully
I think you covered
explaining
it.
well enough.
I think you covered it. I think the value here for both the outside agencies and for council in having the CBC deliberate and to review these applications is, I think, again, like I think what we have the ability to do at the CBC level now is that if an application comes in with a significant, well, any request that's additional, that's an increase to the budget funding or core funding that they might receive, we can turn it down immediately and say, no, we don't, like, based on what you've provided, we don't think that's an applicable avenue, and we will not make that recommendation to council. So there's a little bit more power over here in this committee now as a result. But it's I think that any good case, of course, will be reviewed appropriately, as they all would. But
Is it passing the buck? Is it saying we don't want to say no to them, so if somebody else says no, that's better for us?
I didn't see it that way.
Okay.
I think that Verge kind of hit it on the head when she said the lens of the community is a bit different. We have direct connections and contacts with the executive directors and other senior management at these places. So in particular, I don't see it that way. But at the same time, I would hope that any recommendation that the CBC would make to bring to council, so if they, again, if for example, the museum asked for an additional $30,000 and we said, yeah, we think you need it, that they would heavily consider that based on the value of perspective that we brought in support of that. That's what I would hope.
One last thing quick. What is the goal of what we're doing here today? Like, where do we want to get to by the end of this hour or hour and 15? I see there's 3 items here. Like, what's the plan?
For the purposes of this, I think Virginia mentioned that she needs to get going at about 1:45. But I was going to say this, which is why I've asked her to speak first about this, about the outside agencies, the funding process. So just to be aware in the background that I think that there's a caveat here that now the outside agencies can technically apply through ACAP for projects. And then I think we can probably move on from this because that's kind of a more of an administrative piece that we will be determining on the back end that doesn't have much to do with you, other like in the CVC, that is, other than to bring it forward potentially maybe at a summer meeting now, if the timing makes that possible, for the outside agency requests, which is not where we typically meet. But it is what it is.
Yeah,
so that's
sorry, Alicia, we'd have to make that adjustment to Lee's point just in the guidelines, but I think, ultimately taking a look at the guidelines, and I'll let Alicia kind of go through the next step of kind of what we're hoping to take away from this, because any updates to the ACAP guidelines, the recommendations need to come from the working group to the committee, and then from the committee forward to council for approval as we move into this next round of applications in the fall.
Oh, and I'm so sorry, Miranda's had her hand up for a while. I'm sorry.
Oh, I see. I've brand her.
That's okay. I appreciate very much Jonna's questions and also having the information from Verge, really helpful contextual and like technical information. To build on that a little bit, I was just wondering, and this may not be known at this time, if one of these agencies comes to us requesting an additional increase in the future, is the expectation that that increase would come from the pot of ACAP funding, or would it come from a separate pot?
So my understanding might be wrong. I'll leave Virginia to correct me if you'd like to. My understanding is that if they're asking for an increase in core funding, that we review that request. And then if we agree also, or whether the committee that is agrees, they would make that recommendation to council in time for budget. If everything is status quo and they're asking for the same amount that they asked for last year, we make the same recommendation if we feel that that's accurate. But if they're asking for additional for a specific project or something else, that could come from ACAP. But again, it's up to the committee to determine whether or not it's an applicable project.
So just so that I'm clear, it doesn't necessarily come from a separate pot of funding. If it's core funding, an increase to their core funding that they're requesting, is that automatically assumed to be drawn from the ACAP funding bucket? Okay.
No,
But
sorry
if
about that. Yes.
if it's a small project fund that they're requesting, if we open it up to the possibility that they could apply, in that case, it would come from the ACAP pot.
Yes.
Yeah, I would, personally, I wouldn't want to see the ongoing operating funding coming from ACAP, because then that's just an ongoing reduction in the amount that we have year over year. And that's just a significant impact to ACAP.
And I fully agree with that.
Perfect. Okay, so I think if it's okay, we'll move on to the next step. And I can give us a bit of a summary unless there's any other conversation that we'd like to continue with at this time for this particular point. But again, like it's more of an administrative process on the back end, and we'll be ironing that out and then letting the committee know what the process is. And again, like asking for feedback as well. But at the same time, in terms of what we're looking at today, we're going to do a quick guideline review. And I say quick just because I've got some summary notes from the former subcommittee that was formed in 2024 that can probably expedite the process. And then I also have a small, not a real proposal but I'd like to kind of discuss how we can move forward and what should be done. My biggest concern here is that we have a bit of a short timeline, as we always do. And so we're trying to get this to council and then properly approved and implemented. I'm saying, I think prior to the end of June, so that we can potentially deploy it properly in October. And knowing what I'll be doing in terms of my activities and other duties here, responsibilities, I know that September is a busy time, and we'll be re-educating people in October as to how to apply for this fund for the most part. Even if there are small changes, they will be significant enough to applicants. So we'll have to be prepared for that. So that along with that comes the redevelopment of application pieces, short form cheat sheets, different things like that as well. Go ahead, Lee.
So I already have a list of recommendations of guideline tweaks because that's the way I operate. As I've been going through this process over the last couple of years, I've been notating kind of the headache points and the pinch points that I've experienced, both from an applicant standpoint and from a committee member standpoint. I'd like to discuss one of my recommendations right off the top because I feel like it might impact this item that you're talking about. And I would like to remove early versus late intake. I would like just one intake process.
Okay.
And for that to happen at possibly an earlier time, like in the January, February, March space. I don't know the rest of the committee members feel the same, but to have the review processes and the application deadlines happening during the fall and the spring, which are arguably the most busy times of year for anyone in arts and culture and events, is really cumbersome, and it's difficult to meet and find times to meet and find times to review. It's a very large amount of work to review these, and doing it twice, trying to have the same unbiased view and lens. I realized why it was created when this fund was new and we were trying to get enough applicants interested. But I think that rehashing the whole experience twice a year is becoming a lot.
I agree with you. But at the same time,
Yeah.
I also know that part of the reason why that was recommended to us through the cultural consultation that happened years back was to try and make sure that we're meeting different organizations with different needs at different year ends. So technically speaking, one of the issues that we have within our program, and we can go back to all the details later, but I was gonna say one of the issues we have is that we haven't really been keeping applicants to requiring them to apply at different times of year. So in terms of the year end. So we see applicants that come in with a project whenever they can for different parts of the year. And in terms of implementation, we haven't been able to keep up with the demand of processing these applications within a time frame. So it's become negligible, that conversation. But I think that's why it was intended initially. Now that we're 50-50, I think that's a conversation that we need to have with the rest of the committee, but I don't disagree that it's absolutely worth having. It was something that came up in a prior subcommittee, ACAP review subcommittee meeting, but at the time it was felt that it was like this timeline was acceptable. But I'd be happy to open up this conversation at like a CVC meeting as well. So
I think that would be valid because quite frankly, I think we're having trouble getting and maintaining CVC committee membership because it just feels like all we do is review ACAP applications.
I feel that way.
Yeah. It's a lot.
So, sorry, as we joke about ACAP season starting in September and ending in June, like it's, yeah. But so if it's okay with you all, I'll go ahead. I agree with you. I've noted that, and I think that we will carry that forward if that's okay for further discussion. But for now, if it's okay with you, I'd like to do just review the summary of concerns and talking points that have come up. I'm going to fire them off rapid fire. I'm happy to bring up this up. We're going to ultimately what we're going to walk away with is some conversation about how we move forward and maybe some thoughts and channel back and meet within next week or two, hopefully. So this is, again, I'm happy to share these notes and then give you more time to ruminate on them. But some of the guidelines of summary of concerns that we kind of gathered from both committee members at meetings, the subcommittee review, and then just again, our personal experiences are, it's a lengthy, heavily worded document. It's difficult to navigate the application forms, both technical and otherwise, in terms of the language that are used. Many project streams and eligibility can be confusing to applicants as it changes so significantly. The stacking of grants causes confusion for the review panel in terms of how to allocate funds. Operational requests can be large and they're not capped in a meaningful way. Right now, they may not exceed 25% of an annual projected operating budget, but some of these groups are quite large, so that's a lot. That's quite a lot. And if we're doing proportional funding, that could be a significant amount of money. No caps or timing conditions on a number of operations requests. It could, which I mean by we can, applicants can apply year over year for operations funding. Seed funding I think it's a useful stream, but it's only been accessed by one applicant successfully so far since the beginning of this program. So should we be reviewing applications in future submission intakes after they've been rejected? So this is a conversation piece as well. Should we, again, if someone's resubmitting an application that's been rejected before, but if it's eligible, how are we asking them to fine tune it? Often applicants do, but how much do they need to change it before? Is it all conditional upon what else has been in that particular intake? There's more conversation to be had there about that. The cultural diversity stream currently doesn't have a cap. And what I'm finding with the cultural diversity stream is it's a valuable tool to make sure we're serving parts of the community, but ultimately it's operations plan funding is what they're applying for through those applications. The rubric needs a review or addition of further criteria, which with respect to cultural diversity, I think should be a stream that should be, a part of the rubric. Currently, the guidelines state that all members review all applications in absence of a conflict or recusal. And that's not always accurate either. Page 10 of the guidelines say the organization receives, we talked about this, about the outside agencies, that's all the same thing, sorry. Previous talking points, generally I'm happy to say people are generally satisfied with the staff support and the number of intakes as applicants. The committee is satisfied, is the committee satisfied with the timing of the grant application intakes was a question I had. So that's good that we brought that up. And so in my personal notes here, I've indicated I would like to see a reduction in the number of grant streams. And we could talk about that in detail. The number of festival and events grants streams should be reduced in particular. I think we should rebrand the term and consolidate. Again, add dimension to the rubric. I think we should add caps for operating requests. And we should also perhaps review the ability for groups to be accessing that fund year over year. And I'd like to see the adjustment of the threshold of small project grants increase to 4,999. But I think that just makes everything more challenging when we're reviewing applications in terms of the grants will have to, sorry, the applications will have to be very good to access that full amount. And so that's where I'm at today. I know, again, that was pretty quick and rapid fire, but does anybody have anything that they'd like to talk about in terms of anything that's just been mentioned?
Alicia, did you say you were going to share? That's was a lot for me to write down. You're going to share that list, right?
Yeah, I'll share that with you. Actually, for the sake of right now, I'll throw it in the chat. And
okay. And then relevant, I'm not sure whether this was included specifically in what you just mentioned. Did I, my note says multi-year operating grants. So is the thinking that certain types of organizations could be awarded funding for multiple years for operation grants as opposed to 1 year at a time? Is that part of those notes you just discussed?
No, that's more complex than I gave it. Okay. I would say that realistically speaking, I think operationally speaking, we have noted in other committee meetings in the past a need for not necessarily an emergency fund, but for some groups that really need operational assistance to continue moving forward. There's need is supposed to be built into these applications throughout. We know that some applicants are, I'll just say, wealthier than others in different resources. And so in that, I wouldn't like to see let's just say for the sake of conversation, a really wealthy organization asking for operating year over year and basically pushing others out. Yeah, when potentially they could be asking for a project as opposed to operating grants, and that might be a lesser ask.
Yeah, I without getting into the conversation, I think it's a double-edged type of thing. It certainly reduces the time involved when you have organizations who, well, you use the term wealthy. Many of our organizations are while they might be more cash balanced, if you will, or have, or just be better from a profit and loss standpoint. A lot of what our organizations do is based on people who volunteer. And, we have to remember that I can't think of very many organizations where people are being paid, large salaries or salaries at all, even honorariums to a certain extent, right, to do this work in the community. And so while there's the thing about me, I just think it should be something we should, further discuss as an option for various different things, for being able to plan ahead, for timing reasons, for not having to review those applications every single year. Most provincial and federal organizations that are doing operational funding, if I'm looking, I don't know a lot about the OAC right now, but I can tell you Canadian Heritage is doing 2-year grants at a minimum. And you write your story once, it is adjudicated once, you either have that money or you don't, and you have some, as an organization, you have some comfort knowing more than just 9 months down the road, if you will. So thanks.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful perspective to consider. Again, I think that's one that probably has to come back. We can talk more about it here, but I think that's, well, ultimately it all goes back to the Cultural Vitality Committee for review and for approval before we make the recommendation, right? So I'm thinking a couple of things here in particular. Like I'm just looking on a very technical perspective at the ACAP guidelines. It should align with the cultural plan, but as we're currently out of date with our cultural plan, I think we should review the existing cultural tenets that have been indicated in the current guidelines and fine tune that a bit, because we have an opportunity right now within the guidelines. In terms of clarity, we should focus on what funding should be used for, what should it not be used for versus what it should be used for. That tends to be a much larger we'll say, application of funds rather, as opposed to having 2 or 3 things, capital expenses, uniforms for personal use, that type of thing. Plain language, clarity of definitions, potentially going back to one application form, reductions of notes within the the guidelines. And then again, just clarity on stacking and making sure that we're sure whether or not stacking is eligible or it's not. Something that we talked about at a former meeting back in, I think, October, was that stacking is currently eligible as per application form, but it's not mentioned about stacking streams in our guidelines. And so we should come to a decision on that too. And the thing is, I think that it muddies the water to be able to stack. And it generally I don't mind that it generally allows applicants to access a greater range of funding for different reasons, but at the same time, it makes it difficult for the review panel as well, and then for reporting afterwards and keeping appropriate stats. Lee?
That was one of the main things on my list, was right away, no multi-stream applications and no grant stacking. It complicates things from a great many of, and I felt it a lot when we were reviewing, and like I think it was mentioned, like wealthy organizations, and I don't think it's necessarily wealthy, it's even just more savvy applicators know how to kind of hack the system, and that's what it kind of felt like in some ways. And it didn't sit right. It didn't feel like it was true to the letter of what the ACAP grant was meant for. So I think back in the day when, again, there was not enough applicants, it made sense, but I just don't think that that's a reasonable thing to have anymore. It's the grant stacking.
While we're talking about it, is there anybody here that's here today that's in favor of continuing with stacking as we currently have it? Great. So I've heard nothing. And so what I'm saying is I will make sure that, like, as we redevelop, that will be something that is clear in the guidelines moving forward, because we've been allowing it. Now we have to make sure it's very clear that it's not allowed. We're not eligible if it's approved by the committee. That's great. If it's okay, I have a few other notes, but I don't want to bore everybody. Go ahead, Lee.
I just, based off of what you mentioned, you said it in a possibly a slightly more concise way. I would agree with everything, reducing the number of grant streams, as well as merging festival events, community events, cultural celebrations, whatever we want to call it. One is a community event. Adding diversity to the rubric, I think, would be great. My only other addendum that I feel is significant is I would like to discuss not just possibly capping operational grants. I would consider either removing them entirely or adding such a sustainability clause that we get out of that game altogether, because of that year over year element, because of that. I love the idea of seeding or having a staggered, like, okay, a seed grant at 100% and then 50% for the second year and 25% for the third, or something to that effect. But having the same year over year applicators that are, quite frankly, the majority of the budget, it doesn't seem like it's in the vein of what, again, ACAP was made for. But that should also be integrated into this new concept that we're looking at, with the other funding also going through our recommendations of these other operational heritage organizations. So I feel like that's a big can of worms. I don't necessarily want to spend an hour discussing it, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay. Thank you. In the chat here, I've added some more notes, proposal notes rather. Obviously, this is just light notes, kind of summarizing what the elements that might change might look like in this scenario. So small projects, the change would be up to $4,999, up to 100% of project budget. Unincorporated individuals and cultural groups could access this funding. I think it should be one-time funding for project. I don't think that projects that run year over year, if they're not necessarily related, should be eligible in the future. It should change pretty significantly, I think, if possible. In terms of large projects, we could change that from, well, right now they're about $5,000 to $20,000 as well. The significant change here could be up to 50% of the project budget versus up to 75% of the project budget being requested. So it does reduce the funding available in that way. You'd need to be an incorporated not-for-profit to access a large project. Again, one-time projects, for example, furnace installation, as this is an issue that comes up, commemorative season of events for like a 50th anniversary celebration or something, but something that's outside of the range of normal for those programs, and more or less a one-time project. And you must be an arts, culture, or heritage based organization to apply for this. And so while I'm going to say very specifically, the Waterloo Grassroots Region application that ACAP, the Cultural Vitality Committee saw come in last year, it was very, very highly rated. They weren't based in Sault Ste. Marie. There were different issues with the application and in terms of their networking and how they were looking to support these programs. But technically they are a resettlement organization, but they nearly took, we could have given them over $20,000 basically based on the application they wrote if we had chosen to move forward with that. So there were, like I said, I want to make sure that these larger projects are being allocated to organizations that serve our community and certainly who are based here or nearby. And again, that they have a basis of arts, culture, and heritage and not just having an event that happens to promote that one thing. In terms of operating, again, as we talk more about operating, we can get back into this. I'd like to cap it if possible. And I was going to say that I do like the idea that it can't be applied for every year, but I don't mind every other year in theory, because again, we have different needs. But if that's not something that's possible, it obviously needs more conversation, as we've already determined. That's fine. I'm not sure if we should remove seed funding, to be honest, because I think it just muddies the water. But at the same time, though, like I'm very open to that conversation. Like I said, it's only been used successfully one time by an applicant in the most recent round of intakes. I've seen it applied for a few times, but it's taken quite a lot. It's a pretty high bar or threshold to meet, I think, to try and get funding for that. And then looking at community and like cultural events and major festivals and events that were known, and community events, they were both capped at the community events was capped at 5,000 and major festival events were capped between 5,000 and 10,000. I think that these should be open to unincorporated not-for-profits that have been in existence for at least 2 years, or collectives with significant history of success and achievement, but it's up to the committee to determine what that success looks like or what that history is. And they also must be an arts and culture or heritage-based organization at its core. So those are some thoughts to kind of make it a little bit clearer in terms of the guidelines that I've had. I'm happy to circulate these thoughts as well, again, for further review. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with what's been lightly proposed here?
I have a question. So where did these ideas come from? Are these ideas that you've been percolating on because of feedback that's happened over time? What's it based on?
Yes. And so this is all kind of a culmination of the subcommittee meetings that were had last year. Predominantly, I think it was Brenna and Miranda were present at those meetings. Again, funneled their thoughts and feelings. I've been taking notes about throughout the ACAP process over the past couple of years as we've been going through it. I don't think there's anything too radical inside this, but looking at the document here, it's staying not true to the existing structure, but it's not deviating far from what's available already. So these amounts, we're looking at 2,909 up to a maximum of 100%. These parameters are kind of already set here. And they're just kind of evolving them a little bit to see if we can meet the needs of the community better. It's pretty rare that we receive a small project grant request for under 2,999. So to me, that says that we're not offering enough to complete the projects. But at the same time, if that's something the committee would like to continue to offer at that level to try and economize, or I'm not really sure, but I would like to see that increased, I think, because again, we very rarely get applications that request less than that. Generally, I find this to be very confusing, especially because many people, sorry, go ahead, Lee.
I was just going to ask, based off of Miranda's comment and Donna's question, I'm wondering, I think a lot of these recommendations are good, but I know that I have some specific items that I'd like to recommend as well. I'm wondering if we could submit any kind of recommendations that we might have if you could find alignment, and then maybe make like a red line version of the application and the
Yes.
rubric
Yes.
that you could then circulate out to everyone so we could really see what that might look like.
Yes, absolutely.
I feel like that's easier than kind of trying to look at it piecemeal and integrate our own ideas and try to keep up with what everyone's thinking and what these ideas might solve or may create more problems. I think it's just, I think maybe a red line after everyone's had time to kind of unpack everything and give some input, that might be a more time effective way of reviewing everything.
I agree. This is a lot. This is a lot to take in and very quickly, and I've had some significant time to think about it. And so again, I have some thoughts from administrative end that might not make sense for the larger committee who are supporting the community in that way, and that's okay. And we will go with what the committee wants to do. But in terms
Alicia,
yes.
honey, can I just, excuse me for interrupting. I'm hoping to ask a question while Virginia is still here. Is Virginia still here?
Yes, let me see. 1 second. She was, let me just double check if she stepped away from a moment.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I think she stepped out for a moment.
Okay.
But if you'd like to, like, you don't have to send it to me, but if you'd like me to follow up, I'm very happy to.
Well, I'll say it now. Sorry, as I said, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it is something that along with all of these ideas that people are going to share and specific proposed changes and so on, very important to me, and I'm sure to others, is these guidelines and this fund is supposed to be aligned to the cultural vitality strategy. And the strategy is now out of date. And I don't think for some time, although I could be wrong, that we've had sort of a State of the Union, if you will, report on what we have accomplished on the previous strategy. And then, you know, what do we need to do to, like, what it's difficult to create a suitable funding program when we don't know what the next steps are. So that was why I wanted her to be part of listening to me say, what's the plan to update the strategy?
Valid.
We've been talking about it for a couple of years now, and we haven't gone anywhere, and it's the budget cycle coming up, and we're going to need money to do it, and so on and so on. So I'm talking now. I know it's not this. What we're talking about today is not big picture, but in a way, it is big picture because these guidelines and this process should align to what we're trying to accomplish overall over the next 5 years. Thank you.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. Looking at that, though, I was going to say I know very reasonably that we don't currently have money in the budget for a redevelopment of the cultural plan. And that's something that we're probably going to have to ask for specifically, as you said, as we go to budget. So I guess the question becomes, do we leave the program as is for another year, or are we able to make any changes to it now that might at least help administratively for the review panel?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we don't do what we're doing. I'm not suggesting we wait, because I mean, that would be probably somewhat not a good idea to wait, but we should be thinking about it and saying at least, how are we going to get an updated strategy? Because by the time we find money for it, or we lobby for money for it, or whatever, and then we get, it's another year before we actually, if all things came together in the budget process for 2026, it would be a year from now for sure before we would actually have an updated strategy, I'm sure. But we don't want to hold this up by any stretch of the imagination.
No, for sure. The thing is, there are some things that could just be made easier without fundamentally changing the program. And I think that there is significant value that was put forward, not just by like our predecessing committees and those who took part in this consultation process to get us here. I think there's significant value. I just think that we've evolved a little bit, and I think that we can do the same thing without making major changes either. So what I'm hearing from this, I'll talk to Virginia and see like when she's available. We will come back with a conversation about where we're at. We can definitely provide an updated report about what's been accomplished. Back at the Cultural Forum, we were able to provide that in a presentation type format, but we could go down the list and we could talk about where things have landed but where those needs are now. Unfortunately, I think the reality is that this is just going to be an evergreen document. And I think this is going to be something that we look at every couple of years as well. Again, maybe not with significant changes, but I think that we're going to have to keep our eyes on this moving forward too. And so, so I'm not opposed to small changes by any means. I'm in agreement that they need to be in alignment with some sort of guiding document and plan. At the same time, I don't really know how to do that without one. I was going to say, other than to look back at what has been available through the existing community cultural plan. For reference, and in case anybody's watching or listening and needs it, it's on the saultestmarie.ca website /ACAP, and there's a link there on the top of the page. Actually, I'll just send it here in the chat for here who's interested as well. Again, it goes 2019 to 2024, but I assume that it was developed in 2018. We're just living in a very different climate than we were 6, 8, 7 years ago now. And so there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of value here still, but at the same time, how do we kind of move forward with just what we need to do on a very practical level, I guess. So what I'm also hearing is I'm going to send out the guidelines, an editable document to everybody to review. I'll send out the notes that I consolidated today that I've shared in chat so that nobody has to copy and paste those. And then I'm hoping for your feedback, and we'll plan to send that to me by a certain date. We'll review, try and consolidate it, and then we'll meet again to discuss. In terms of the evaluation process, would we like to move on to item 4.3? In terms of the evaluation process that we currently have, it's a little bit separate from the guidelines for review, because again, our process isn't necessarily tied to our guidelines in the same way. Is there anything that anyone's experiencing right now that you'd like to think about and maybe either share now or send later for consideration? Lee.
I think my main issues and concerns with the evaluation process is the size of the packages along with the quantity of the project, and the fact that, quite frankly, there are far too many that are not complete in a traditional sense. And this might sound harsh, but I would suggest that incomplete packages that do not have the required documents, that do not have completed the application to its fullest, need automatically be excluded from consideration before it even gets to the committee level, because we put too much time and energy into this to get through something and try to read between the lines and look at supporting documents to try and figure out what a project even is or what the funding is specifically for. I do agree that some of those rubrics and that could be cleaned up to be less ambiguous, but I think that's one of the reasons we're also having trouble keeping and maintaining people to review these packages, is because at the end of the day, it's just a boatload of work, and we're spending too much time on the wrong things.
In addition to that, I have seen a significant amount of AI used this round. In the past, I wouldn't say if it was used, it wasn't as glaring, but there's been a lot used. And while I certainly encourage applicants to use tools to get to the most concise information as possible, I'm not sure it's serving the community, and it's not really serving the review panel in terms of some of these pieces. Again, in some cases, I know in the past that we've looked at applications from certain cultural groups in particular that might be newcomers to Sault Ste. Marie. And those applications, as we looked at them within the cultural diversity framework, have or haven't made it up high enough into the rubric to be considered for funding. So if that's where we're using AI to help consolidate the information and make it clear for the committee, I don't have any issue with that by any means, but certainly like I said, I've seen a lot of AI used significantly. And it's sometimes a little bit sloppily as well. When you can tell that the formatting is where it is and what's happened, especially when you've seen repetitive formatting from application to application. It's like they've put in the question, they tuned it to the results, and it's this, and that might be accurate, but I would like to see that differently conveyed as well. So anyway, that's the concern that I have coming up that I'm not really sure how to address, and so I'll leave you with that today. Donna?
I have another thought around reducing volume, perhaps. Some organizations, government related, that I've worked with, they have a multi-staged application. So basically, round one, you pitch your high level. It's on a couple of pages, maybe, it's really like, tell us your idea. Tell us what you think it's going to cost, and and something along those lines. So it's very effective for the grant, for the organization or person who's applying, but it's also very effective for getting a high level of what somebody might be looking for, and then that person is either invited to fully apply or not invited to fully apply. That's another thing that could potentially be something we could talk more about.
Oh, that's so interesting. I like it. I can't say too much. I know of other people who've been through that process as well. And as long as the timeline between stage 1 and stage 2 is appropriate and communicated, it's fine. So, oh, that's really interesting. And then it reduces the administrative burden from applicants, but also then from the committee as well. So again, like by reducing the further number, so interesting. And so I guess the issue there is, again, if we have, let's just say 85,000 for applications in the one round, we could potentially ask for X number of applicants that exceed 130 to bring it down. Yeah, that would make sense, that we make sure that we are funding everybody.
Yeah, or even, I don't know where this thought around one intake might go. I think there's pros and cons to it for sure, as there is with everything, which why making decisions can be so challenging. But you could be, as an example, you could be looking for a first stage application, and I think it really only works for certain types of applications. But you could be looking for first stage applications in the fall, and then people are invited to produce the full application, by the end of the year or early into the following year. And so you're really doing it far ahead of the process. You're not doing it aligned or like parallel.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing them parallel. You're doing this is first step for certain types of applications, potentially. It's just a thought.
For sure. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. Lee, please.
I really like that idea as well, because I think it's respectful also to the applicant's time, as well as the adjudicator's time. And I know that we had some discussion on like the one, and I know we're going to be bringing it to the broader committee, doing one process or like this, a multi-stage process. And there was worry about meeting community needs. It is a universal granting body's best practice that there is either rolling applications that happen throughout the year, or there's one deadline. There has to be a cutoff. So it's either first come, first serve rolling, or it's a cutoff. I think we're actually unique having an early and a late, as being a little bit too kind, and it's creating a lot of more work on our end. Oh, some OAC programs have 2 deadlines, Miranda shared.
Something I wanted to mention, I don't know if this is the right spot for it, because I think we passed this already, but I'll just say it. In terms of the end of October being our first intake of the year, I really struggle with that because the applicants I speak to are typically writing applications that are due for the OAC usually a week later for Northern Arts grants. And because that one is in direct conflict with, or rather in direct alignment with things that are happening here, I know that a lot of applicants find that really difficult. I couldn't speak to April by any means. In that, it hasn't been communicated the same way, but at the same time, yeah, grant season, right? So, okay, really interesting. I really like the idea of a multi-stage application, that's for sure. Again, in terms of respecting time and administrative burden, and even on a very practical level. So when we talked about this before previously at CVC, where I am not allowed to put a live Google link for intake for forms on the city's website. But I mean, if we were asking for limited information, this should be really easy to accommodate. So again, people working with me directly, I could provide that on the back end. I could have a static PDF. This could be very easy. It would be even easy just to copy and paste some of this information from an email, and so making it easier for applicants to not have to chase and exceed barriers, right? One of the issues that we have with PDFs is just that, not only are there issues with AODA, among other things, with the PDFs that we have with our information and the way that we take in the application information, but also that if people are not running the most up-to-date version of the PDF or of Adobe, it's causing conflicts. Which is part of what I've found in this most recent intake. I think we've never had more technical problems than ever before. So something has changed. I don't know what it is. It wasn't necessarily the applications as they were housed on the website, but something has changed and it's caused a lot of upheaval, we'll say, in this process. So, okay. So moving forward, if we're at 12:58, if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to share my notes of this meeting. I'm going to share the notes that I had prepared before. I'm going to share a copy of the ACAP guidelines for review. We're going to set another date for the next meeting. And if anybody has any questions or would like to funnel any feedback my way, that would be great. And we can do so by email, but not as a reply all, if that's okay. Lee?
How do we best put these recommendations into these documents to not make more work for the rest of the committee members and yourself? I changes or
I think track changes would be great if you're capable. If you have some thoughts or notes or comments on the side, that's acceptable as well. I will consolidate to the best of my ability all of the things into one document. And then we can take a look at that one document from there. And if there's something missing or has been by omission, by accident, or however otherwise, we can flag that as well. But if that's okay. I see this happening pretty quickly, unfortunately. I'm just looking at my calendar. I see here we're on May 1st, apparently. If we could have that feedback by, if it's possible, how about we just say the 12th, the morning of the 12th? Because I think a week is a really short turnaround, and we have other committee duties that are kind of ongoing and not quite clear at this point either. So in terms of our timeline, so if we could have that back by the morning of the 12th, I can consolidate. We could potentially meet on the 14th or 15th. And then hopefully that would be, we'd be able to make any recommendations. And then I think at this point, we're probably going to be meeting into the second or third week of May for CVC. So I can add it to the agenda there if we need to expedite the process, or if we're not there yet, we'll take the time that we need, of course, to get there. Okay. Thanks, everybody. This has been a lot. And I will follow up through email. And if anybody needs anything, please just reach out to me directly as well.
Alicia, did you not send an email yesterday? I'm not seeing it here with regards to dates for the meeting that we had to postpone.
I did, and I haven't gotten responses yet, for the most part.
When did you send it?
Let me just check. Sorry.
Was it Tuesday?
It might have been. Let's see here. We have
Oh,
a few other
I found it. I found it.
Thank you.
I found it. Okay, I'll answer it right now.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.